Hi. It is noon on Wednesday, and I am Janet Fitch, and therefore it must be Writing Wednesday when I answer your questions about writing, the writing life, craft questions, psychological questions, existential questions, all the things that lead into your fiction. I everything. This is autumn, and things are starting to turn around right now. It's a good day, and welcome to Writing Wednesday. So I answer your questions. If you have questions today, put them in the chat, and I will be happy to answer them. And if you have questions for me in between times, hi Laura, write to me in through my website janetfitchwrites.com, and I can make a Writing Wednesday around your question. And if you want to support me, subscribe to this channel. It helps me know whether I should continue doing this. I hope that you enjoy it. Hi Hope, good to see you. Um, and I do have a question today. It's a very um, it's a very literary question, and so we'll go slow and take it apart. Um, I don't know if you guys know that I was not an English major. Sarah, we're doing yours. Yay. Um, I was not an English major. I had to learn all this stuff just as many of you are learning it from whatever direction it comes from, and slowly putting it together, reading and processing and writing. And, unlike, so this is a literary question, but we're going to look at it, what it's asking, rather than getting hung up on language. So I will definitely take it apart for you. The question is, what? No, that's not the question. It's the other one. Here we go. This is. I thought. Hi, Janet. I thought you might be interested in exploring defamiliarization in a Writing Wednesday. Essentially, how to make the everyday or mundane feel fresh and new. You could look at it from the sentence level or more big picture plot character level. Have you ever encountered or engendered it in your own writing? I'd love to hear your take. So this is Sarah's question. Um, so defamiliarization just means breaking us out of our habits of seeing and thinking. So making it less familiar, making things less familiar. And the origin of the term defamiliarization is from a guy named Viktor Shklovsky, a very important Russian critic who is in Chimes of the Lost Cathedral, my last novel. He's an actual character. Uh, he lived at the House of Arts where my character Marina lived, and was very important in the development of Russian literature at the time. And yeah, he had to leave for a while. Um, and he's a very famous literary critic. Books like this, Theory of Prose by Viktor Shklovsky. There's a big one on Tolstoy, The Energy of Delusion. I'm sure none of you are going to be running out to get this book, but maybe you'd like to read um, a short blurb about it on Goodreads or something like that, just so you know what Shklovsky's project was. And his basic idea of, he had lots of ideas, some of them more or less applicable, but defamiliarization, Ostranly, I think, is the Russian. Um, and it was the idea of making it new, making it unfamiliar. Um, And why would you want to do that? What is the point of defamiliarization? Um, Hope says it's the fun part of hanging out with young children. Everything is new to them. Yeah, yeah. And how do we do that to our reader? You know, how do we help the reader see the world new? That's what we read for. That's what they read. Your reader is reading for a new way of seeing the world, not the same old, same old. And I think that, um, especially in, sadly, broad readership in America, and writership in America, frankly, um, has taken literature in such a careerist way. It's, we're so, not to dump on capitalism, it's an engine, there's an as economic engine, but to bring that into the arts and to bring that into the creation of art, is a real Achilles heel in American letters, and kind of confuses the writer sometimes. And I think this is a really good time to address that in conjunction with this idea of defamiliarization and Shklovsky and all that. When you know that defamiliarization just means making the world a little less habitual, letting people see the everyday in a little bit, just see how strange it is. Have you ever come across something in daily life and go, if that was not, if I made that up, if I put that in fiction, people wouldn't even believe it. Like, like, life is weirder than fiction. But how do we uh, really encapsulate that? How do we get out of the familiar, the habitual, same old, you know? And there's so many levels of how to do that that Sarah talks about, just even mentioned in her letter. Um, you could look at it from the sentence level, from a big picture level, plot level, character level. These are all places that you can stop and make it a little different, take a different look at reality, um, jog it off its track a little bit. So, well, Hope says you can travel and come back to your normal to see it fresh. I think that's a reason why many people travel, um, is so that they can get a fresh take, not only to see new things, but to come home and see the familiar in a different light. But we're talking about literature. Um, it's a whole different deal. Well, it's related, though. It's related, because we are the instrument. So if we can't do it for ourselves, it's going to be very hard to do for the reader. Um, so there are, it's the difference, it's the prevention of over optimization, automatic responses. And the biggest automatic response is the cliche. So anytime, you want to say, black as night, white as snow, uh, big as a house, that's a moment for defamiliarization. You break the language, you break that conventional language, and you come up with something else, and something startling that pulls the reader off of the robotic track. It breaks that, and um, big as something else that's surprising because you invented it for the moment. Uh, Working with metaphor is such a good way of beginning defamiliarization. Um, Big as a teapot at, a teapot dome, or then you're bringing historical. You when you do a metaphor and you're comparing two things, it makes both of them a little strange. It refreshes them both. Um, there is you you can it's the thinking that can be disrupted, or the objects and situations as strange or new, and then language itself can become defamiliarized. Poets, you know, are very good at that, changing syntax, using unfamiliar words that they might not be unfamiliar, but maybe using them in a way that the reader hasn't seen before. Takes them a moment. It's like, wow, oh, that's interesting. That's different. Um, the reason it kind of works against when I was talking about the kind of commodification of literature or of prose writing, that often what people think of as interrupting the smooth consumption of a piece of writing. You might be in a workshop where people are just like, oh, I stumbled over that, or that was hard to ingest. The writing is a little hard to digest. It's a little bit too rich or too something or other. Before you completely obliterate that, think about defamiliarization. Think about defamiliarization when in the reader always takes a little bit of time. It always slows the process down. You can't just eat it like a bag of Doritos. You have to stop and consider, the reader has to stop and consider this strangeness that just got thrown at them. So in defamiliarization, classically, or in high literature, the Shklovsky end of things, um, you want to slow the reader down a bit. You want it to be a little less consumable. And this is something that works against our people. The customer is always right. And you perform an easily digestible product that's a book. And I think that is kind of um, the litmus test if we're talking about commercial versus uh, literary fiction. Is we're talking about digestibility and consumability. And literary fiction tends to do things that surprise the reader, that make them think again, that they've never seen before, but it also makes them see the world differently. Easily consumable stuff doesn't make you think differently because it never sets you back and go, oh, do I think that? Do I agree with that? Do I disagree with that? Or what's he saying? God, try to read Borges. It's like, he presents a world that is not the world we live in. He's defamiliarized the world. So it's a world where one year when the moon is in this sign, you're a slave. When the moon is in this side, you're an orator. When the moon is in this side, you're a soldier. That is not the world we live in, but it certainly has echoes and makes us stop and think, God, what would that be if we lived in a world like that? It makes you wonder, like, what kind of a world do we live in? It makes you stop and think a little differently. So um, you so areas of defamiliarization. Let's start with character. Hope said children young children see the world as fresh and new. They don't have explanations for things. They sometimes come to wrong conclusions about what they're seeing. Um, and that's a really nice way to defamiliarize, is to have a character who sees the world uh, in a fresh way. It's their first time around. I call them first lifers. Um, that's very interesting. When they uh, the first the dog in the nighttime, the first time we I think I've ever seen maybe an autistic narrator, um, and you're seeing the world through his eyes, and it's like, oh wow, yeah, I know what he's seeing, but he's seeing it in a way that I don't see it. And then when you see it in the world, you carry a little bit of that other vision. It has defamiliarized the world for you. It has presented you with something new and non habitual. Um, it's the way that you grow up. I mean, it's growing up uh, is often a loss of that freshness, that you don't stop and gape at, a pigeon scratching in the roots of a tree. Um, I don't have time, time is money, you got to get to work. Whereas when you're with a little kid, you're taking them to school or something, and they stop and they have to examine the pigeon digging in the roots of the tree. And if you're open to that kind of thing, it makes you stop and remember, oh yeah, that's pretty amazing when you think about a pigeon and the pretty colors on their necks, and the funny way they walk. And um, so defamiliarization brings you some of that back. So characters can defamiliarize, the add a defamiliarizing effect to the book. Um, Foreign, to have a character who is a foreigner in a country that they're not familiar, and they're seeing things for the first time. Oh my God, they're really doing that. What are they doing? What are they standing in line for? Why do we need all that kind of detergent? You know, Never seen that kind of, display of detergentry. My God, if you come from, people I know who've come from the Soviet bloc back in the 80s and go to a market the first time, they're just frozen with, I mean, how do you choose between 40 different kinds of laundry detergent? Um, and then habituation is getting used to it. You make a decision, you're going to buy cheer, and that's what you look for, so it cuts down all this other stuff. But to savor those moments, and Hope is talking about that too, coming home after foreign travel and seeing your own world. God, I remember being in Mexico with friends and coming back to San Diego and just noticing the streets and the intricacy of sidewalk, grass, curb like this, and then the gutter like this, and then the sewer grate like this, and then the road. I mean, the intricacy of that I'd never thought about. I'd never given it a thought, but the layers of structure in an American street um, was just grabbed my attention. So it's great to clean that out. And when you have characters, that's why young people make such good protagonists, because they're seeing it for the first time. I'm reading a Paul Auster book now called Invisibles, and it has a 20-year-old college student who is taken up by this kind of disreputable couple, um, for he knows not what, and he's trying to figure out what the fuck is going on with these people. And he's very attracted to them too. Um, and, many wonderful books and different kinds of narratives use young people for that reason, because it's their first time around. They don't know enough to avoid the weird couple. They feel the weirdness, but they don't know enough to avoid them. Um, the confused young person with their first time with some creepy person, and they don't know, they don't want to, they don't want to be rude because respect your elders, but this somebody is being really weird, and they don't know enough to just, they're not sophisticated. They have to learn. Nobody becomes sophisticated. Uh, they're not born. People aren't born that way. You learn. So the learning process is very interesting to us. Um, so Sarah, Damien had to learn to use a smartphone. Very interesting. A person who's been in prison, they won't know about things in the contemporary world. So yeah, Back to the Future. Oh, not Back to the Future. What's the one with Brendan Fraser uh, and Alicia Silverstone? I think it is. Uh, Blast Blast from the Past, where Sissy Spacek and Christopher Walken are convinced that there was a nuclear bomb, and they went down to their shelter, and they've been in there for 25 years, and now they're coming out, and their son is looking around and completely has no idea what he's seeing. Um, Always interesting. Uh, does anyone else do a mental game sometimes, Sarah says, uh, where they imagine they're viewing the world through the eyes of someone from 100 years ago? Yeah, that is a wonderful. Time travel books do that. The defamiliarization is really interesting. Um, many writers are going to be doing this naturally, imagining the world from 100 years ago. Imagine coming here from Mars. What would a Martian see? What would you see coming out of prison? What would you notice first? um, all of these are character related defamiliarization, and also um, ways of seeing situations in life in a fresh way to the reader, suggesting different ways of. I remember reading Kundera's Unbearable Lightness of Being, I think, one of the great novels, and especially novels of ideas. And he has a character in there who hates parades, hates any kind of mass demonstrations, especially organized ones. Um, Her boyfriend, who's a liberal Swiss, doesn't understand why she doesn't want to go to the May Day march, in the West, workers' protest. And she's from the Eastern Bloc, um, and remembers like having to get up and go to those forced celebrations and parades and young October kind of pioneers, and she just can't stand it. And so that's interesting, to have a character who dislikes something that everybody else likes is a very good move, defamiliarizing move. Um, Hope says the music of chance, which I guess is Paul Auster. He's very interesting and full of ideas. So I've read probably 3 of them now. Uh, and Hope says, I like to imagine myself going back to the early 90s before the internet and tell myself about Twitter or YouTube. That's interesting. Um, the child perspective GB in Ian McEwan's Atonement. Yeah, yeah, that's classic. Um, I, the go between, where a child is a go between lovers and not understands what's going on. Uh, you know, I mean, there's certainly defamiliarization in The Sound and the Fury, where your first big chapter is through the point of view of a 33-year-old um, developmentally challenged guy who's seeing things that are just shapes and movement, and he doesn't remember things, but he feels them. The defamiliarization of that is amazing. So that's a character, a point of view defamiliarization. Um, and Posh Radical, hello, um, says, I was here last week and liked your advice. I want to write a story from the perspective of Black slave, but don't speak that language. Defamiliarization. Um, it's, I mean, very few of us have been enslaved. And if you are not Black, it's going to be harder, but can be done. It's a matter of attention and really, 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 really doing your research, and really, really, really exposing yourself to how other people are handling that language now, because, you know, any kind of, um, socially problematic area should be thought of in terms of the contemporary sensibility. I mean, it can be done, but research, research, research. Um, and I want to make a narrative that fits into the time, but speak 21st century English. Yeah. Yeah. You have to be very careful, and you have to have a sense of the rhythms of language to be able to do that successfully, because, this is not Pudd'nhead Wilson. We do live in the 21st century, and read Percival Everett's James and see how he handles it. It would help if you spent a lot of time in Mississippi. Probably so. Tennessee, pretty close. So, other ways of defamiliarization. You can defamiliarize your, let's see, by telling a story. Stories themselves can be conventional, habitual. We're starting the meme of the disappearance on the train, or the meme of the missing wife that the detective goes after, that kind of thing. So you can disrupt the habitual by, say, telling it from another point of view. There's a lot of that going on. Wicked is a perfect case in point. That book retold the story of Wizard of Oz from the point of view of the Wicked Witch of the West. The Wind Done Gone, which was retelling Gone with the Wind from the point of view of one of the slaves in Tara. That's a whole different story, isn't it? So picking another point of view has become a very popular way of defamiliarizing familiar stories, and breaking that slick, habitual automation of these tales. So that's an excellent one. Adding the uncanny to the ordinary really defamiliarizes it. That it's our world, but there's something creepy happening just behind the scenes, so that it layers what's just going to the store with a layer of dread, or anything could happen. You go to the store and suddenly the cans seem to be shifting. There's some defamiliarization. There is, let's see, we got a bunch of people from Tennessee. Very good. Sarah recommends The Confessions of Franny Langton, who does this very well, point of view of a African American slave. Memphis. There we go. So what else? So metaphors have good connections. Somebody's psychological state is shifting. Having somebody who is having a breakdown, who's trying to deal just with everyday life. Um, those are wonderful stories, and definitely defamiliarize. If anybody read The Bell Jar, somebody who's cracking up, trying just to deal with everyday life as a young woman, that certainly adds that. Um, Making character reactions unusual or unpredictable. So that is really defamiliarize. If you have, um, say, a you have a girl who's approached by some weird, creepy person, and most of us would be, trying to get away from them or placating them, or, and then maybe you have somebody instead, the girl like leans forward and says, "You really think that? You really think that's the end of the world? You really think that's what's going on? Oh my God, you know, that there are mind reading snakes under the, bench." Really? So that's an that defamiliarizes the convention. That defamiliar what 99% of all people would do. If you have a character who does the opposite, that's really going to get our attention. Um, Unusual word choice. This is sentence level. Unusual word choice um, makes the reader slow down and engage more deeply. Um, so Llewellyn says, in consideration of time travel, I have trepidations about visiting any time outside my own because it is frightening to go beyond my own timeline of life. Yeah, so if that interested you, you would bear down on that. But there's no law that says you have to do it. So GB says, would you please go a little deeper into metaphors and similes? Um, if I say, a girl is like a red, red rose or something, everybody's like, yeah, I've seen that before. How pretty, But if you say, um, a a pretty girl is like a heart. This was I think Jim Smith uh, song. Pretty girl is. There's nothing prettier than a pretty girl digging a heart-shaped hole in the ground. Um, that it brings an unfamiliar thought in, instead of pretty equals pretty. It's pretty equals danger. Pretty equals you know uh, fateful. A fateful attraction. Um, eh, metaphors, but all metaphors give you something fresh. Um, and you get there by pressing on the metaphor, so how, you know, white as milk, yeah, yeah, yeah. But you press on that. How white was that? How, tell us about the milk, you know, is it, um, is it poisoned? Is it, um, you know, suitable for lactose intolerance, whatever. It's finding your own way of expressing, and what associations you can lead the reader to make that they might not have made before. Um, simply by helping describe something in a fresh way, it makes people see something in a fresh way, which is what we're trying to do as fiction writers, even commercial fiction writers. benefit from something vividly described that reader hasn't seen before. Uh, but you can take that even further, and you can challenge, you can upset people, you can do the opposite of what they expect. Um, uh, let's see. There's this Snowden contest that some of the people from Tennessee are talking about. Google the Snowden, like Edward Snowden, contest, a short story contest with Elmwood Cemetery. That's interesting. Um, so Sarah says it's like a lopsided equation that's still correct. Well, you never want to say, 2 + 2 is 4 is so habitual that it doesn't make the reader think at all. It doesn't even set off a synapse, you know. Whereas if you say 2 + 2 is 4 on alternate Thursdays, then the reader is like, wow, what world is that? I'm interested. Um, so people are talking about co-creating with one another. That's awesome. Um, do you have any author book examples? GB says about metaphor. Yeah, every good writer uses metaphor. Um, I love Chandler for metaphor. He's great. Um, someone lies there in the bag of bones position, or the bag of clothes position that always means one thing. He's a master. Uh, but most good writers are very, very good on metaphor, whether they're writing genre fiction or whether they're writing literary fiction. Um, other defamiliarization, Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude, he's created a world in which the bleed between fantasy and what we would think of as conventional reality is very tenuous. I mean, they bleed back and forth. I read a Colombian writer, Ingrid Rojas Contreras, who wrote a memoir about her family. Um, but the bleed between myth and magic and what we would think of as conventional reality is absolutely permeable. And she says that in her culture, in South America, that that is reality. That what we see in North America, and this is the whole point of travel. Okay, so now we're talking about intellectual travel, cultural travel, that people see the world differently, and that defamiliarization is totally intriguing. To have a character who has a different spiritual framework. If anybody's been around somebody who is very superstitious, I mean, it is so interesting. I mean, whether or not you want to take on a symbol set like that, uh, it's everything has a meaning. You know, the you know, 3 crows went across the sky, and that means blah 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 blah. Even if I don't believe it, the next time I see 3 crows, I'll think about that. Milagro Beanfield War does that too, a New Mexico native story. Yeah, so other cultures do it, but if you look deep into your own culture, there's going to be some of that as well. Um, I when I was writing my Russian Revolution um, books, there is a big strain of superstition in that culture, very much alive, and part of the culture. You know, you don't shake hands across a threshold in Russia ever, um, and people who are nowadays, not superstitious, not involved in all that, but because they come to that culture, they just don't do it. They sit on their suitcase before they leave leave to travel. To kind of, everybody sits down and you pull your energy in like you're going to take it with you, but there's a whole superstition behind that. There's a wonderful book called the Bathhouse at Midnight that talks about all the, it's like this, it's an encyclopedia of all the different kinds of superstitions. But your own culture will have that too, even if you're, consider yourself an average, everyday, whatever. If you look down into your culture, it's all going to be there. And it's interesting. And that defamiliarizes as well. Hope asks, how did you get interested in Russia? If you look in my website and you see about me, there you'll see where that comes in. But to defamiliarize with superstition is very interesting to do. Having a character who sees things differently, and you can make up superstitions. You can make up, like, a very good exercise is hours of the day. Like, what are the different hours for? What's 7 o'clock in the morning for? What's 8 o'clock in the morning for? What's 9 o'clock in the morning for? What's midnight for? What's 3 in the morning for? 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning. It helps. It addresses things that most people don't think about. So that's also defamiliarization. You make characters who have rituals and routines that are different than most people. I'd never heard of 11s, but that is certainly something in British culture where people stop and have something sweet, a little tea or something at 11 in the morning. The enhanced sensuality, which me, I'm like pounding on that one, to touch things and unpack the sensual world, because that is unfamiliar to most people now, who just are trying to earn a living. They're on the screens, they're in their car, they just feel pressed to the wall. And the writer can take time to really look at something, really describe something, the way the sky looks in between the branches of a tree that's losing its leaves. And what does that look like? And take the time, because most people don't have the time. And then when they read that and then they go outside, the world looks different to them. The surrealists used to play all kinds of games to defamiliarize the world. My favorite is to go out in search of the miraculous. You go for a walk and you're looking for miracles, and it changes the walk. It changes the world, because normally we think of the miraculous as being, it's some kind of angelic intervention or something. But when you're looking for miracles, a leaf that fell into wet cement and there are these imprints of leaves, it makes you notice. The defamiliarization makes you pay more attention to the world. And that's what we want to do for our readers. And unless we do it for ourselves, of course, we can't do it for the readers. But also just whatever causes a deeper engagement with the text, with the art that is being created on the page. Beautiful language slows the reader down, and then it allows them to see the world more vividly. Your work is not habitual. You can't just eat it like a carton of ice cream. You slow it down. And many writers are afraid to slow the reader down. Many editors are frightened of the reader being slowed down in any way. But a sophisticated reader who's looking for something artistic is looking to be slowed down, is looking to go, wow, oh, let me think about, do I agree with that? So that's a thought that could be unfamiliar, or something beautiful. It's like, wow, look, how did they do that? That is so gorgeous. Read it again. Um, Characters doing something, a gesture they've never seen before, you know, um, characters who are rarely portrayed. Um, I love seeing work on the page. That's personal. Um, uh, what else can be make the reader slow down and think differently? Um, yeah. So just it in a lot of the literature they talk about impeding the reader, not telling everything all at once. Things that slow the reader down. Um, I'm thinking of defamiliarization. There's a horror novel called House of Leaves, and the house that is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And if you open it up, the typography is astonishing. It's so beautiful, and it demands more of the reader to read it. How do you read it? David Foster Wallace, Infinite Jest. How do you read it? All these footnotes. How do you read it? Do you read it from front to back and then go and read the footnotes from front to back? Or do you stop every chapter and go back in the footnotes? Or do you go up and down like this? Um, the reader has to figure out how to use it, and form is like the prime means of defamiliarization. Uh, when people see a form they've never seen before. I remember when we saw uh, the Jennifer Egan the Geek Squad, and it was texts. It's like we don't. It's like, really, she wrote a book with texts. It's become familiar. That's a problem with faddishness, is that it's fresh when you first see it, and then it becomes old hat and becomes dated, especially if it's linked to technology. So notice that as well. Different language in Ragtime by Doctorow, GB says. The pace of the novel uh, manipulates the perception of the reader. Time expanded or sped up. Dialects or heavy accents, Laura says, do that. Um, you have to be really careful again. Rhythm is better. Rhythm and syntax is a better way of handling dialect um, and accents. Not to make people comic. Um, that's you have to have a pretty good ear and a feeling of respect for the speakers, because conventionally heavy accents are portrayed in the past by uh, mainstream Anglo culture as objects of fun. People who do not speak a conventional English are considered objects of fun, and then the distortion is more about putting people down. Zadie Smith is very good at accents. Um, Subcultures of jobs. Oh, to see a profession that you've never seen before on the page is wonderful. People who are rarely written about. It defamiliarizes the world and makes you look at people. When I wrote did the foster care book, people started looking at kids on the street who looked, kind of aggressive to them before. And, they looked at them with new respect because somebody that they'd never seen as, the complex people suddenly came forward. It's like, oh, yeah, I understand where these people are coming from now. I'm not as afraid of them. I'm more, sympathetic. Um, the struggle of somebody, my second book, the struggle of somebody, a survivor of suicide, of somebody else's suicide, and what that's like, um, makes them look at people differently. So that's the defamiliarization. Uh, let's see, what else? What else? So language can do it, point of view, um, sometimes together, like Sound and the Fury. Um, most literature does it in different ways, takes something familiar and makes it strange. Um, but people, mostly it's like a good character is somebody who's new, has never seen it before. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle. I've got older people in the book that I'm working on now. And how do you do defamiliarization with somebody who is an older person? And because older people are subject to such change and things that they don't understand as much or more so than young people, because there's usually nobody explaining it to them. you know One day you had a job and you had your apartment and everything was going along, and suddenly the landlord raises the rent. Suddenly the government drops your health care subsidy. Suddenly your food stamps are gone. um, and then what do you do? And scrambling in a new world, being ill. Oh, being ill is a wonderful defamiliarization, because being ill is another country, you know. It's a parallel country to this one. It's a parallel reality. But if you become ill, there's a whole world that you've never seen before. And you don't have to be 12 to have that defamiliarization. You can be 78 and have, suddenly you're in a world of doctors and nurses and feeling really shitty, and people, your next door neighbor cut your lawn for you, your next across the street neighbor took out your trash cans. Wow, we don't even speak. I don't even know their name. And suddenly the world changes and brings up stuff. Um, Maybe those kids that it's like, get off my lawn. And then you're ill, and their mother sends them over with a plate of donuts. And the kid is afraid of you because you yelled at them. But suddenly it's like, wow, look at that kid. This is a nice kid. Didn't realize that. So any place is a place for defamiliarization. Um, so let's see, any other books that defamiliarize before we leave, that use a character maybe who sees the world differently? Um, I'm thinking of my books. Let's see. Well, here's a defamiliarization form, the formal defamiliarization. I've shown you, I think, Ava by Carol Mazo, but I'm going to grab it off the shelf right now. So this is out of Dalkey Archive, which is one of the great avant-garde presses, often the most interesting books that are published in Dalkey Archive. So there's Dalkey, and here's Ava by Carol Mazo. And this is what this looks like. It's all told associationally and in individual sentences and small, very small paragraphs. So it's a story about, it's a woman who is dying of cancer, and so she's in bed thinking about her life. So there's not a lot of forward front story. Uh, so it'll be like, fax me a little harder. Yes, the Vietnam War, we watched it on a tiny television. I imagined it a little differently, you said, and told your version of the Kennedy assassination. You were still unborn by a mile then. And these are separate sentences. I imagined being the bullet. He was an aspiring writer, I recall, a particularly imaginative student. Danilo escaping from the Russians in 1968, he was 12. Beloved City of P, which comes up periodically. And so we understand cumulative what these individual little sentences are about. But it takes a while. This is a gorgeous book. Must recommend. Must recommend. Um, what else? What other books are work on form? Defamiliarize with form. Well, you know, Sebald, The Rings of Saturn, and The Emigrants. They're books that you can't tell if they're fiction or nonfiction, and there's photographs in them, and it's like, is this made up? You never know. Ocean Vuong's the big one. You couldn't tell if it was fiction or nonfiction. My guess was nonfiction, posing as fiction, and the form is perplexing and fascinating. The memoir by the poet Lee Young Lee, The Winged Seed, is one of my absolute favorite books. Super poetic, and you know, it's all about it's these images and the images that recur, that kind of magnetize other ideas that stick to them. So every time you see it come up, it's been developed. So I recommend that highly. The Winged Seed. Here, let's put some titles here. The Winged Seed by Lee Young Lee. I think Which Way the Lees Go. The Kiss of the Spider Woman, Hope says, had an unusual form. Then there's Ava by Carol Mazo. And we talked about The Sound and the Fury by Faulkner. We talked about 100 Years of Solitude, Marquez. We talked about, let's say, Labyrinths, my favorite, Labyrinths by Borges. House of Leaves by Danielewski. Just a few ideas. Well, we've run our time on Writing Wednesday, so I thank you for coming, and I wish you good writing. And subscribe if you haven't subscribed. It's very helpful for me. All right, thank you. Bye.